Good evening and welcome to this virtual leadership talk, sponsored and supported by the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Team of the Desert Southwest Conference of the United Methodist Church. My name is Michael Edwards, and as a member of the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Team, I am privileged to be your host this evening. Our guest presenter tonight is Reverend Anthony Tang. Pastor Anthony has a Master of Divinity degree from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and an Executive Master of Business Administration degree from the W.P. Carney School of Business at Arizona State University. He has worked in a variety of church settings as an ordained elder, previously served as a director of connectional ministries for the Desert Southwest Conference. Since 2016, he has served on the board of directors for the General Council on Finance and Administration of the Global United Methodist Church. Anthony is passionately committed to the ministry of the laity and to the grace of Jesus Christ that transforms our lives in unexpected ways. Since 2017, he has been the lead pastor for Desert Mission United Methodist Church in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is currently a candidate for bishop in the Western Jurisdictional Conference that will meet this November. Without further ado, I give you Dr. Anthony, Reverend Anthony Tang.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. And, I would love to hear, if it's okay, could we just go quickly around? I see that Erna, you're at First Winslow, and Jim, you're at Mission Bell. I'd love to hear where everyone else is. Tony, could you share what church you attend?
Tony Lee from Mission Bell.
Oh, also from Mission Bell. And how about Ruth?
I know Ruth, and she's from the Hope United Methodist Church in Bullhead City.
Oh, fantastic. And Laura?
I'm with Desert Skies in Tucson.
And Suzanne?
I'm with Shepherd of the Valley in West Phoenix.
And someone's on the phone joining us?
Kim Windsor from Wesley United Methodist Church in Phoenix.
That was Kim?
Yes.
Oh, well, welcome. And did I miss anyone?
Just me, and I'm from Prescott Valley.
And Alberta, where are you at?
I'm at St. Mark's in Tucson.
Thank you. Yeah, all fantastic churches. So it's great to be with you this evening. I was thinking a little bit about the pandemic and having, I think now in our third year, isn't that amazing that we're now in the third year of moving through this pandemic? And last year I had done a sermon series looking at our immune system. And so I wanted to bring that into play with us a little bit. Would anyone, I don't know if anyone could give us a brief description of what an immune system does for the body?
I don't think it would be technical, but isn't it a protection to the body?
A protection to the body, something that watches out for the body, tries to keep us healthy. And the immune system usually takes care of things like, well, viruses, like the coronavirus. Hopefully we have a healthy functioning immune system, which can help us fend off the coronavirus. What happens if the immune system is too strong?
It turns on itself and affects the body.
It turns on itself, and it affects the body in positive or negative ways?
In negative ways.
Negative ways. So we normally think of those as autoimmune diseases, right? If you have an immune system that's too strong, it begins to attack the body itself. If we have an immune system that's too weak, is that a good or bad thing?
That's a bad thing too, because you can catch diseases that way.
Too weak of an immune system and you can catch diseases. Too strong, you have an autoimmune disease. So the immune system needs a bit of a Goldilocks kind of condition, right? You want a healthy immune system, and healthy means not too strong, but healthy also means not too weak. So my question is, does the church have an immune system? And what would that look like? I'm not asking rhetorical questions, so if you've got thoughts here, I'm looking for your interaction. What would a church immune system look like?
A governing board.
Governing board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Lee is the chair of our governing board at Mission Bell.
So so yes, a governing board can, well, the governing board is, it can support an immune system.
Yeah.
It's our leadership board. You know, maybe this will help you think a little bit more about that. Is part of my reflection last year in the sermon series, I had a reflection about our country's immune system. And so what does our country's immune system look like?
I think it'd be our military.
Our military, right? The military is intended to protect us. What else would be part of our country's immune system?
The checks and balances in the 3 legislative branches.
Checks and balances, absolutely, yes. Also, kind of along with military, we could think of as local police as well. Okay, so let's come to checks and balances. What happens if you have too strong of an immune system with checks and balances? What does that produce?
Stagnation.
Stagnation? We could also say, could I use the word bureaucracy?
Yes.
Right, if we have too strong of checks and balances, kind of similar to, if we think of our checks and balances, if we have too strong of it, then that could require consensus. And any organization that requires consensus, meaning every single person has to agree before we can move forward, that'll just cripple the organization, right? Because you're always going to have somebody who disagrees. And if you need 100% agreement, you'll get nothing done. So too strong of an immune system. What happens to our country if we have an autoimmune disease related to our police or military?
It's ineffective. It's not effective.
Well,
Right.
it's almost too effective, right? And so we could say that when our police and military become too effective, then they become abusive against its own body. So if we have an autoimmune disease in the body, that means our protection system begins attacking the cells of our own body. And if our country has an autoimmune disease, and that means that the military or the police would be attacking our own citizens that they're supposed to protect. But then we could go too far to the other extreme. So if our country has too weak of an immune system, then I'm trying to avoid being really political here. So I'm going to try to balance in between those two extremes, right? So if our country has too little of an immune system, that's where we get situations like some of the cities that went full force, let's defund all the police. But then you had rampant theft, and we had increase in murder rates. We had homicide, just terrible things happening because we didn't have enough police. So too weak of an immune system, we've got a problem. But too strong of an immune system, we've got a problem, right? So if I can speak to the left and the right on that, that the immune system, healthy immune system means keeping it together where we protect our body, but we don't attack our body. And when it comes to checks and balances, what happens if we have too weak of an immune system on checks and balances?
I think you have just what we're seeing in the country right now, either far left or far right, and going that way.
Right. So we have questions really. I think that's pretty realistic for our current country because we've got struggles with our executive our branch that is instituting. Now, I don't mean just our current one, right? So we could say the last two or three. Our executive branch is ruling by executive orders, which is really the responsibility of our legislation. So when our executives are signing executive orders, they're undermining the legislative process. But then likewise, when we have judges that are making rulings based on politics and partisanship, then we're again weakening those checks and balances. So too weak of an immune system, and we open up the door for potential abuses. Too strong of an immune system, and we've got a whole nother door of abuses where we can't get anything done because we come to gridlock. So when I think about the church's immune system, I believe personally that all leadership begins with an immune system, of establishing a healthy immune system for the church. Because similar to the body, if the body has no immune system, or if we have an autoimmune disease, we're not going to function well, right? With no immune system, you can't go outside because you're at risk of picking up any disease. If you have too strong of an immune system, I mean, there's so many diseases, like lupus is an autoimmune disease, right? And I'm running short on thought here, but there's many different autoimmune diseases, and those can create horrible conditions for those that suffer from them. It's hard to be the best of who God has created us to be when we're suffering under so many health concerns. And I would say the same for the church. It is really difficult for the church to be the best of who God created it to be when we've got foundational, basic problems that are undermining who we are as a church. And so I believe that the very first step we need to address when we're going to look at healthy functioning is, let me go off a tangent a little bit. So often we talk about church growth, right? I mean, surely all of us have heard a conversation about church growth. How do we grow the church? How do we bring new people in? How do we attract visitors? How do we be welcoming to keep visitors a part of us? And, years ago, I thought to myself, should we be doing more advertising and bringing more people into the church if our current church is not functioning? If we're suffering under conditions of, could I say, disease, I think that evangelism really needs to wait so that we can get our health in order, to get the health of the church together. And when the health of the church is together, that's when we want to be inviting as many people as we can. Because to invite people without a healthy organization, we're inviting people into a mess. And so, of course, I know all of our churches are fantastic and wonderful and perfect. So, of course, not talking about any of ours, but we would find, I think, most churches along perhaps a spectrum where some may be suffering from too weak of immune systems, some suffering from too strong of immune systems. And unfortunately, I think there's even a place where we can even have some of both of those ends, too weak in some areas, too strong in other areas, creating unnecessary conflicts and confusion and dis-ease, which means we can't be in a position to grow or get healthy as long as those are in place. And so, in my opinion, addressing our immune system is absolutely the very first step we need to take. So I mentioned that we'd use Dare to Lead just as a reference point If you have a chance to read the book, I think an excellent book. I'm just going to, this is Brene Brown. Some of us pastors occasionally will refer to her as Saint Brene, just for how much we read of her. But Brene Brown's work, no matter what you're reading, I would say Brene Brown's work really focuses on the problem. If I could summarize it myself, I would say the problems of shame-based cultures or shame-based living, and how we can move to a healthier place. So I'm going to read from page 131, and this is again from Dare to Lead. And this is what she says. What's trickier is that in most cases, shame is hidden behind the walls of organizations. It's not dormant. It's slowly eating away at innovation, trust, connection, and culture. But it's tougher to spot. Here's what to look for. Perfectionism. I suffer from that one, so you should know that right off the bat. That's my own shame-based issues. Perfectionism, favoritism, gossiping, back channeling, comparison, self-worth tied to productivity. I'm going to interrupt again. Self-worth tied to productivity. I think we could think of that in the church as well. In what ways is the self-worth of our church tied to our attendance, or to our budget, or to how many people, just showed up on Sunday? And I don't think that's healthy. I think what Brene Brown's saying is that's tied to a shame-based culture. Harassment, discrimination, power over, bullying, blaming, teasing, and cover-ups. Any of these things are signs of a shame-based culture. Now I'm going to jump over to page 135. And she says, either way, when the culture of a corporation, nonprofit, university, government, church, sports program, school, or family mandates that it is more important to protect the reputation of that system and those in power than it is to protect the basic human dignity of individuals and communities, you can be certain of the following problems. Shame is systemic. Complicity is part of the culture. Money and power trump ethics. Accountability is dead. Control and fear are management tools. And there's a trail of devastation and pain. Now, if we visited a church that was struggling with these kind of problems, do we want to invite neighbors to that church? Oh dear, no, right? We don't want to invite people into those environments. And so this is where I sometimes get into trouble. I was invited here, but I sometimes get into trouble because, we spend so much time talking about church growth and evangelism, and I believe we are upside down. I think that we really need to address church health first. Now, does it have to be exclusive? It doesn't have to be, especially if, if your church is not in the extremes. If your church is, somewhat towards the middle, then yes, we can do those at the same time. But in a really dysfunctional system, I would say the first thing to start asking is, how much of a shame-based culture are we a part of? And another way to ask that is, as I was pointing out, that self-worth tied to productivity. Are we so focused on productivity that we are ignoring basic standards of dignity? And that's where I would say we really have to back up. And the first thing I think, when I come into a congregation, the first question I'm going to ask is, what's the health of the organization? Is it healthy here? And what are the signs of health? And what are the signs of dis-ease? So now I'm gonna risk getting myself into a little bit more trouble. Can I ask by show of hands for those of you that I can see, how many of you attend the annual conference? Okay, fabulous. So you should know what I'm talking about. Last summer, in the summer of 2021, and in fact, the summer of 2020, because I've been at this for a while, I got myself into a little bit of controversy with the legislation I presented at annual conference. Do some of you remember that? Oh, I see some head nods. Now, I was accused of public shaming and dragging out dirt in front of the annual conference. I don't believe I was. I believed that I was not naming names. I was pointing out signs and symptoms of our annual conference and proposing a change in course, a change in direction. And I would summarize, from that previous list, I would say that we were suffering, and somewhat we still are struggling with. Culture doesn't change quickly. Struggling with favoritism, the gossiping, the back channeling, comparison. Because surely we've heard of some people comparing their churches, right? How much attendance did you get on Sunday? Comparison, that same self-worth tied to productivity, as well as more secretive harassment, discrimination, power over, and bullying, and lots of blaming. And I, for one, felt that for me, I wanted to do everything. I've also been accused, I've been accused of being anti-conference. That one hurt the most when I heard people telling me that. I love our annual conference. I love the Desert Southwest Conference. I've served in, I think it's 8 different churches in our region from the time I was a youngster. I've been in 8 different churches. I've loved every church I've been a part of. I love my clergy colleagues. I have, I've not gone along with every layperson I've had, but for the most part, have had great relationships. I love our churches. I love our conference. And, when I had my own story, and when I had my own experiences of these things, I mostly tried to keep my mouth shut. I kept my head down for several years. But then I had other people tell me their stories, and more people tell me their stories, and more stories I heard, stories of people leaving our conference and leaving the ministry, stories from people who gave up their orders, their clergy orders. Sorry, I riled myself up here. But every time I heard those stories, I grieved so deeply. And it broke my heart to think that this culture of shame was breaking down our churches. I recognize that our churches across the United States have been in decline for many years. And I am now thoroughly convinced, my own personal theory, that we have spent so much time trying to grow our churches that we have given up on the majority of our churches. We have focused on what we believe are the the high potential churches. Let's send tons of money to the high potential churches when there's so many of our churches that are fabulous, but are being left to kind of wither away because nobody's giving them any attention. And well, and that's not, I shouldn't say, I think every pastor and lay leaders are doing the best they can in their circumstances. But I think so often in our annual conference, the way we direct resources and help is skewed towards a few number. And I don't think it's been helpful. So part of what I was trying to kickstart the last 2 years was how can we begin to move in a healthy way by establishing an immune system for our conference. So I want to give this really as an example of what I'm talking about before we get to the local church, if that's okay. Now, am I perfect? No. And was my legislation perfect the last 2 years? Well, definitely not in 2020 and 2021. We're trying to get a little stronger at that. But what we did establish was the task force to heal the conference culture. And I know that quite a few people were frustrated that we heard nothing about it for so many months. Well, not everyone wants to address the conference culture. And it made it a little bit difficult to move forward. But finally, we got to the place that one of the big things we did was we have hired the General Counsel on Finance and Administration. The easiest way to think of the General Counsel on Finance and Administration, or GCFA, think of that as the finance committee for our global church. Same as your local church finance committee, that's what GCFA does. What is a tiny bit different is that it's our finance committee that also runs our HR department for the Global Methodist Church. So we have contracted with GCFA's HR department and the executive, the chief, the CHRO, the chief human resources officer of GCFA, has been visiting with our annual conference on multiple occasions. And the reason this was important for us to establish is because she provides us an outside organization. Because we have lost, Jim, as you mentioned before, part of an immune system for a country is checks and balances. Part of our annual conference's immune system are checks and balances. But I believe we've really lost some of those checks and balances when it comes to, for example, our annual conference is the legislative body of our annual conference. But how many times at annual conference has it felt like we're just approving things that are already approved, or just rubber stamping things? Well, that's a loss of our checks and balances. For our clergy, if clergy feel that they have been unjustly punished, or are being put under supervision without due process, if they have any complaint against the cabinet, who do our clergy go to? Well, apparently we're supposed to report it to the district superintendent. But if it's our district superintendent that we have concerns about, well, then I suppose we go to the bishop. But if it's the bishop we have concerns about, then who do we go to? So having served in this system, up and down the system and between our legislative, executive, and judicial branches, what I know is that we do not have any valid checks and balances at this point. So by reaching out to GCFA, we have been able to work with an organization that is outside of our system. GCFA does not report to our bishop. Now, is it perfect? It's not perfect because if a bishop gets really angry at GCFA, well, they can make GCFA suffer for that. So it's not a perfect system, but it is an improvement. So it's an opportunity where our pastors, and hopefully, right now it's been our pastors. I'm hopeful that it also expands to our lay leaders as well. But they have been interviewing across our region, from our north, south, east, and west districts have all had opportunities to sit with GCFA's HR department and be able to tell their stories. And there have been some pretty rough stories shared of how people have felt disenfranchised. A part of what we're also trying to do is to use GCFA to reevaluate personnel policies for our conference and to develop professional standards. As a clergy member who has been here for 25 years, I've served under 4 bishops. And during this time, I cannot recall when a district superintendent has given to me a written evaluation. I've received written evaluations from my local church. They've been reported to the district superintendent, but I've never received a written evaluation from a district superintendent or from a bishop. Especially not one that has been developed collaboratively with me, based on our conversation and working together. And but those have been submitted upwards, and they've gone into my file. There have been pastors that have been told that they are not allowed to see their own clergy file. That when people have gotten access to the clergy file, I know one person has been told they were not allowed to take any recording devices. They had to leave their phone outside the room, and they could only bring in paper and pencil with them. All of this is against the discipline. The Book of Discipline clearly says we have a right to our own clergy file. So how do we develop professional standards? How do we develop whistleblower protections? Meaning, if somebody says, I've seen something really bad, how do we make sure that they're protected from being unjustly penalized for calling out inappropriate behavior? I've had, not me, another clergy colleague who shared with me a story about how the predecessor pastor that they succeeded, meaning the pastor that had served right before them, the previous pastor of the church had gone on a systematic effort to hire their staff away and to take the take the lay members from that church to that clergy person's next church. Completely inappropriate behavior. I responded, why would you not bring them up on charges? Why would you not, speak to the district superintendent? And they said to me, I was younger at the time, they said, are you that foolish? What do you think's going to happen to me if that person becomes my district superintendent? And so instead of ever addressing it, instead of ever speaking up, we just let it happen. And this is not a functional immune system, right? This is not health. So how do we create whistleblower protections? How do we create protections against unjust punishments? How do we act a little bit more professional, where everything's in writing and we have transparency so that everyone knows what's happening, we understand the rules, and the rules are applied fairly to everybody, not just benefiting the popular people, the popular clergy and the popular lay people, but everybody's treated with respect and dignity. So this is what we're trying to do with our Healing Conference Culture Task Force. And it's going to be a long process, but it's started. And I'm really looking forward, because I believe at this next annual conference, we'll be able to show continued developments on how we can improve our relationships. So Now, that's how I'm thinking about the immune system at the annual conference level, is how do we create protections to support the dignity of all of the members of the annual conference. Now, when it comes to the local church, this is where we're probably most concerned, right? Is our local church immune system. And what does that look like? How do we develop an immune system for the local church? Any thoughts or ideas out here?
For one, I think you have to outlaw the saying, but we've always done it this way. If you say, that's the first rule, it's like you cannot say because we do it because this is the way it's always been done. That's it. You just have to eliminate that as an option in order to have an open discussion.
Having an open discussion, that absolutely is key. So, banning that is a little bit tough to do. But I do hear from you. That was Suzanne, right? Suzanne.
Yes.
Yes. So we know that just because we've always done it that way isn't a reason to keep doing it that way. And at the same time, just because an idea is new doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea.
Right.
But if we don't have all the ideas on the table, then that means we don't even have a chance to consider another better opportunity. So how do we get all the ideas on the table? So I think for me, I believe one of the biggest, most important things for a church to do to create a healthy immune system is to begin with protections for contrary opinions. There's a technical term for this called self-differentiation. And self-differentiation says, it's most often used in this context. I know what I believe, and I hear what you believe, and I don't have to make you believe what I do. And you don't have to make me believe what you do, because we can both still love and honor and respect each other. And sadly, that seems to be what our country is really missing right now. Our country is at war, fighting with each other over words, and being able to get everyone's idea on the table is essential. And we will never get everyone's idea on the table unless we are willing to listen to people that we disagree with. Because they just might have a good idea. We may disagree with their ideas, but we need to be able to hear them and protect them. I had a debate with a colleague recently. It was a wonderful debate. And they challenged me on this, and they said, hey, so what if the idea the other person is peddling is, what if they're peddling white supremacy? Or what if they're selling, some terrible idea like eugenics, or, what do we do with that? And I said, their idea doesn't threaten me. If they threaten me, there's a problem. If they threaten my livelihood, or if they tell somebody else, I don't like your ideas and I don't like you and you're not allowed to be here, I can absolutely interrupt, because that's a behavioral problem. So it's appropriate to have rules against bad behavior. And anyone that wants to undermine another person for a contrary opinion, that's the bad behavior we need to stop. And so I believe one of the most important values that we can have is to say, we respect other people's opinions. We may not disagree with them, but all opinions can be shared here. And if we believe that someone else's opinion is too horrible, too awful to be spoken, I think we've got bigger problems then, because that means that fewer, if as long as we believe that someone else's opinion is unacceptable, then we will start labeling many more people's opinions as unacceptable. Until then, the only people left at our church are people that think just like we do. And if everyone thinks like we do, well, then we're just worshiping ourselves. So yes, I believe getting those new ideas out are important, and being able to create protections for contrary opinions is important. Now, this one's a hard one too, because it takes everyone's participation. And what I mean by that is, when we value that as a community, well, first we have to state it. Right? It has to be stated somewhere, because if it's not stated anywhere, then how do we keep it going, right? So I do believe having stated values is important. Now, values that we stick up on the wall and then we ignore for the rest of our life, those aren't helpful. But when we have values that make a difference, we need to be able to keep communicating those values often and everywhere. And so, what does that look like? That looks like if we hear someone arguing down to somebody else, right? Where they start drilling somebody else for their opinion, we need to stop that. We cannot allow that in our presence, no matter who we are, whether we are a church member with no leadership position at all, or if we're the head of SPRC, or we're a finance member, or we're the pastor or lay leader, no matter what position we are. If we see someone drilling somebody else for their opinion, we have to stop that and make sure that that person, that both parties know they're respected, but that we allow all opinions here. We don't allow bad behavior, so let me go off on that a little bit. Oftentimes, even at my church, we love saying, everybody is welcome here. Mm-hmm. When I'm in groups of people that I know and somebody says that, I'll say, well, not everybody, okay? I'm like, what do you mean, Pastor? I'm like, we don't allow unrepentant, violent people at our church. If they're violent, no, you can't be here. Unrepentant, child abusers, no. Now, if somebody has a record, then, and I have had that in previous church, I have had somebody come to me and said, Pastor, you need to know I'm a registered sex offender and I love coming to this church, but I'm telling you because I don't want to keep any secrets. It happened a long time ago, but I keep this label, I'll have this label with me my whole life. We had a conversation about that. And where we came down on is we reaffirmed he knew he was never allowed to volunteer with children or youth. He was never allowed to be alone in a room with just one other person. He kept himself in public places, and he made sure that he never broke any of our rules. And I said, if you honor that, I'll honor you. So now granted, I didn't advertise that around the church, but as long as he knew his limits, and we practiced that. And then we also, that was a good reminder to us as a church. We made sure everybody was fully aware of safe sanctuaries. Everyone practiced that. And it didn't matter if it was just about him. It mattered for everybody. Everybody practices safe sanctuaries. That's part of our immune system, right? So, and we could say, the basics of our immune system is we practice safe sanctuaries. If safe sanctuaries went so overboard that that young man was not allowed to be in our church, he needs Jesus. he needs grace. He just had to know his boundaries, right? So that's what it means to me about having a healthy immune system that's not too strong, not too weak, but holds appropriate boundaries. So is everyone welcome at our churches? Well, that to me sounds like a too weak of an immune system. Now, I know we say that often, and still when it's in public, I affirm it. And even at communion, I emphasize All are welcome to Christ's table. So there's appropriate times for that. But I do try to, when in smaller groups, I'll remind our folks, no, we do have an immune system here. We have our certain basic protections we need to respond to. And one of those that we remind everyone often is we have to protect each other's opinions. It's okay to have a differing opinion. It's behavior, bad behavior that we protect against. And that's a hard one, especially when those opinions might be against me, but that's where, here's something I'm very proud of at my church. I have mentioned this to some clergy members and they're totally confused by what I'm saying, but I love this. At my church, I often get outvoted. I lose many votes. I'll come into a committee, a topic will come up, and I'll say, here's my opinion. This is what I think should happen. And my committee looks at me and they'll say, are there any other ideas out there? They'll start talking about it, they'll take a vote, and I will have lost, I don't vote at my church. So they'll all vote against me, they'll do what they're doing. And what that affirms for me as well is, I know everybody is thinking for themselves. Another example, I sent an email to one of my committee chairs, and I told that committee chair, there's several items that are coming up, and I would like for the committee to consider this possibility. And that committee chair then wrote to the committee as a whole and said, and Pastor Anthony expects for this to happen. Well, I immediately had the next meeting of that committee. I asked for a moment of personal privilege, and I said, with no disrespect intended, I have to address that comment. This is not an expectation. I present this to the committee so that you may debate it and discuss it. It's one idea. If you have a better idea, please let it be known. But you are not a rubber stamping committee, and I don't treat you like that. So I want to be clear, I'm not sending you expectations. I'm sending you ideas for your consideration. That was important to me because, like I'm saying to all of you, you've got to watch that language, right? Watch for the subtle language that suggests other people's opinions are not available or not welcome here. Get those opinions out, because only when all those opinions are shared do we have a chance of really growing. Another way to think about it is, I believe everybody has some good ideas and some bad ideas. We all do. I have lots of bad ideas. So we all have good ideas and bad ideas. If everyone in my church only does my ideas, then that means the church will never be better than the work that I am capable of doing. And that means, if you're familiar with business terms, I become the bottleneck, meaning no advancement of the church goes except through me. So that means I have to control every decision. Everyone has to wait on me. If I can't make a decision, then I'll go to sleep on it. And that means nobody else can act. Nobody else can work. But I say that as a pastor, but I've seen churches where there's been a lay member that has done the same, where a lay member says, I make the rules here. I control the decisions. I do all of this. So we're all susceptible to temptation and to sin. But when we work together and everyone does their part to protect ideas, we get them out there. Does that mean every idea is good? No. But that's why we have democracy. And democracy means we can vote on them. So that takes me, I believe, this is in line, I think, with checks and balances. I believe democracy is essential for an immune system. Those checks and balances, And democracy means we vote, we make decisions together. Should we wait for consensus? No, that's just bureaucracy. Consensus kills us. But it does mean we vote. And generally, here's what I try to do in my own head when I think about democratic processes in the church. The bigger the issue, the more people that should be voting. The smaller the issue, the fewer people needed. So I don't want to take to our church council the fact that I need to buy more staples and paper clips, right? Total waste of time. That'd be infuriating. And likewise, something mundane like should we move this piece of furniture? Well, that depends on how big of a problem it's going to cause. If I'm moving a piece of furniture in my office, nobody needs to be a part of that decision but me. But if I'm moving a piece of furniture that our counters use to count the financial offerings, and I move it without involving them in the conversation, I have undermined their ministry. That's not a good thing. So I need to get the counters, the finance committee, involved in that kind of conversation. Hey, this is what I intend to do. Are there any problems with that? No problems? Okay, so I'll get it moved. Now, if it's moving the communion table, I'm going to be very careful about that one. I'm going to have a conversation with the worship committee, and I'll probably have a conversation with the church council as well. And when it comes to about 18 months ago, we hired a new person at our church. And before we hired that new person, I talked to SPRC. And now this person would be working with our music program. So I talked to our music staff and volunteers. And then I talked to our worship committee. And then I talked to our finance committee. And then we talked to church council. And even when we talked to church council, we then proposed a church conference so that everyone in the church could vote, because it was a big deal. The bigger the issue, the more people that should be involved in the process. And the smaller the issue, usually what we as staff try to always do is anytime we have a new idea, we immediately ask, who are the people that need to be a part of this conversation? We have to have those people a part of the conversation because we are not to do anything without them. Does that slow us down? Well, it does. And I sometimes frustrate people. But now I'm going to give you another piece. Here's how we try to prevent that bureaucracy from weighing us down. We've also tried to communicate very well that we want high communication in our church. We want the left hand to always know what the right hand is doing. And to fail to communicate is a real problem, and we will address that. That's a behavioral problem that we don't want to happen. So we have little leeway for poor communication. We expect a lot of high communication. But then when we share an idea, hopefully you heard my use of the word intend earlier. Here's what I intend to do. Are there any concerns about that? So what we have communicated with our church is that one of our values is affirmation. And by affirmation, what we mean is anyone has the right to raise a concern. Anyone has a right to raise a question. Anyone has a right to raise up some kind of worry or problem that may happen. But if we don't have a clear reason of why something shouldn't happen, meaning it conflicts with our mission, conflicts with our vision, conflicts with our values and our goals, if we don't have a clear reason, then our expectation is that everybody says yes. So when somebody says, And I try to do this with a lightheartedness. If somebody says, I don't like that idea, then I share, well, we're not asking for your opinion. Meaning your opinion of you like it, you don't like it, that's not what determines whether something happens. What determines whether something happens is if it conflicts, what determines if something should not happen is if it conflicts with our goals, our vision, our values, or our boundaries. If it conflicts with those, then anyone has a right to create, to raise concerns and to stop our forward movement. But if we don't have a clear reason why, then we say yes. And that has worked against me. When I've had church members say, Pastor, there's a few of us that have gathered together, we want to do this. And I pause for a moment and I think to myself, I just don't think that's a good idea, but I don't have a reason I can think of. And so I said, let's try it. Because, what's the worst that could happen? If I don't have a reason to say no, then maybe it doesn't work. But actually, they usually do. So when we keep things moving forward, then our immune system has a chance to work. And again, our immune system is to protect us from any wayward behaviors, but we never want our immune system so high that it prevents us from moving forward, right? So how do we create that immune system? At Desert Mission, how we've also expressed that is we want our 4 guiding principles, or we want anyone to take initiative. So anyone can come up with an idea, but we do ask for, as I mentioned, high communication. So when we have an idea, we need to make sure we communicate with the appropriate people. In fact, something happened just today at my church where folks were moving something from one place to another, and they said, wouldn't this look better in the altar area? And I thought, it would look much better there. But we need our worship committee to be a part of that because it's affecting our altar area. So I'm going to say we can't do that permanently till worship has a chance to meet. Thankfully, praise the Lord, they meet on Wednesday, so they'll get to chime in. But if they're good with it, we should be able to move forward. So anyone takes initiative, we have high communication. We also ask for number 3 is that we have collaboration. So we don't do anything lone rangering, meaning somebody has an idea and they say, I'll lead it myself. I respond, I'm sorry, but we expect collaboration. And in fact, I had a conversation with a church member that they had wanted to start a project, and I said, you need at least 3 people. And they said, I've got 3 people, I've got these other 2 people. Well, they didn't actually have them. And they started, and unfortunately, the program that they've started is not functioning very well because there's only one person trying to drive it. So we had that conversation again to say, you need to find 2 other people. And if you don't have 2 other people doing this with you, we need to talk about not continuing that. So we expect everyone to take initiative, good communication, collaboration, and then our 4th guiding principle is affirmation. If we don't have a good reason of why not to do it, we're going to try it. That's how our church has come up with it. I'm not saying that you should have the same, but what I would say is we want to be thinking about our immune system. What are the bad behaviors that really aren't working? And I could say one way we've also tried to address that is our SPRC committee, our Staff Parish Relations Committee. They worked over, it was a few months' time. They developed a conflict resolution policy for the whole church. If we have a conflict with another lay member, here's what happens. If we have a conflict with the pastor, here are the steps to take. If we have a conflict that moves with the staff, here are the appropriate steps to take. And so conflict with the pastor included Well, here's what it did not include. Let's start by calling the bishop. I assure you, it never goes well that way. We need to follow due process, right? So the first step is we talk to the pastor. If the pastor doesn't listen, then we talk to the Staff Parish Relations Committee, and we have a member of the Staff Parish Relations Committee join us in talking with the pastor. If the pastor still refuses to listen, now that doesn't mean I have to agree, right? It's not that I have to agree with it, but I do need to listen. So if the pastor refuses to listen, then the Staff Parish Relations Committee may feel the need to bring the involvement of the district superintendent. And the district superintendent may at some point need to bring the bishop into, but right, there's clear steps on what happens. Or if two laypersons are in conflict, our conflict resolution policy biblically says we expect for those two people to talk together first. Yearly, every year, we have a conversation in our SPRC committee about what it means to be in an unhealthy triangle when somebody talks to us and complains about another person. Our Staff Parish Relations Committee is instructed every January to not listen to that complaint if that person has not yet spoken to the person they're unhappy with. That if they haven't spoken to that person, we don't listen to them. Now, we don't just kind of drop them off the face of the earth. We say, you know what, I can't have this discussion with you, but what I'm willing to do is walk with you to that other person and let's have this conversation. So that's not our whole conflict resolution policy, but it's, brief parts of it. But our Staff Parish Relations Committee created the conflict resolution policy as a part of that basic standard of healthy behavior. And by practicing that, slowly, we're developing a healthy and healthier attitude. And I'll tell you, we've done hard work over several years. And right now, it is so fun to be at church. People show up and they are joyful and excited. And that's really my dream for all of our churches. The hard part is, I believe that we really need our annual conference to be a healthy place. And that will then kind of spread to all of our churches. So that's why I'm so concerned about our annual conference, is to make sure that that can be a healthy place. And we're moving there. It's the bigger the organization, the slower it moves. So it's going to take some time, but I'm thankful that our current bishop and our district superintendents seem to be open to participating in that process and helping move that forward. So as our annual conference gets healthier and has a healthier example for our churches, I believe our churches can grow more and more healthy. So in sum, I would say that my hope and dream is that all of our churches would have healthy immune systems which prevent or discourage or hold accountable behaviors, but never so strong that our immune system becomes abusive and hurts our own members and prevents us from forward movement or from doing anything productive. Another way I try to think of it is, I want enough rules and boundaries to prevent the worst of behaviors, but I want that list to be as small as possible. Because if that list gets too big, then we're getting overwhelmed by bureaucracy, and we're going to start pushing members away because there's no place for them to exist. So we want clear boundaries and as few of them as possible. And I think that that can help create a healthy immune system. Jeannie?
I have a quick question. When you're talking how it should branch out, I just see the foundational word that all of that branches out from being respect. If that is your foundation, then you're not going to have the gossiping and the back channeling and there's which are not respectful behaviors.
I would respond absolutely. I agree with you. The challenge for us is how can we institutionalize respect? Because that's when respect moves from the individual to our whole community. And when we can do that, if we can institutionalize respect in our churches, that's a church I want to belong to. That's a church I want to go to. And I think, and this is what I mean by evangelism. I'm not wanting to say evangelism is bad. By no means, evangelism is not bad. But if we can institutionalize respect, that's where our church members can say to themselves, I am so proud of my church. I want everyone to know about it. And that's where evangelism becomes really strong, because that means every single person in our church says, I want to tell my neighbors, I want to tell my coworkers, I want to tell my friends, because I have a church community where what I know more than anything is that when I show up on Sunday morning, I'm treated with respect and dignity. And that's, so I agree with you, Jeannie, and I would just add that it's not just about one individual to another, but when we can create it for our whole church. And it starts with the rules, but then it becomes a part of who we are. It becomes a part of the community, part of all of our committees, and then it becomes self-perpetuating. And that's where I think we can get to healthy, strong community growth.
Thank you. Well, I'm seeing that, go ahead, Erna, because I'm just going to take over quickly to say Michael is probably not going to be able to join us. I think he had a lot of technical problems. So we're opening it to some questions for Anthony.
I have a question.
Suzanne.
The EM360 project or program. We were a test site this year, and we had some good things and then some other concerns in that. But what was nice was the district superintendent evaluates the pastor during that. So the pastor does an evaluation of self, and then part of the board did a evaluation. Well, the SPR did evaluation, and then they just had some members of the, not everybody, but a couple members just at large of the congregation do it. And that was very helpful. The only thing is, one of the things that pointed out was that the district superintendent is not able to evaluate in a lot of areas because he's not there to witness these things and that. But though it was very interesting for us as part of the SPR to see the final report, and they were and be able to have that discussion with the parts, because we had never been able to do that before. You have your inputs, and then it just sits there, and you make some goals, and that was it. So that was kind of interesting for us, and we'd never be able to have it graphed so quickly and thoroughly like that. And it helped us get a gauge of where our congregation was feeling about how the church was going, which if it's just SPR people, we would not have had. So I think that may be a big help for some of the issues, because it allows more people to participate, and then you get that consolidated graph. Our big thing was, once we got the graph, was what do we do with it now? So we're working on that.
You know, I actually do really agree with 360 reviews. I'm not sure if you remember this, but it was at annual conference where I raised some pointed questions during the conversation about EM360. So if you remember that moment, I asked two questions. One was, will our district superintendents be participating in the 360 process? And the response initially from one of our district superintendents was, no. Until then, the bishop responded, oh, well, of course, yes, it seems appropriate that our district superintendents would participate. And then my second question was, who will be voting on this? And the response was, no one will. So, that's a case where I believe in the 360 review process, but I also think that that should not be imposed on just some of our clergy and not all of our clergy, because our district superintendents have the same ordination that I do. We have the same ordination, so I don't think they should be treated differently. And secondly, I found it, now I may be getting myself into trouble here. I know we're being recorded, so, well, I suppose this wouldn't be the first time I get myself in trouble, but I think it was so unnecessary to not allow a democratic vote. I mean, as I said, the bigger the issue, the more people that should be involved in the decision. I mean, after all, friends, how many times have you seen the bishop voted against in our annual conference? That almost never happens. It may have happened once in 2021. But I mean, if our bishops have good intentions, our annual conference has approved everything they've done. So there was no need to say, this is so good, we're going to impose this onto all of our clergy in the local church. It's unnecessary. And I think what frustrated me in that moment was that was an opportunity to help heal the dysfunction and the shame-based culture of our annual conference by trusting the body to say, hey, we're actually gonna tell you how much this costs, because I never heard that number at annual conference. But to have our cabinet say, we're gonna tell you how much this costs, we're gonna give you the information, we're gonna allow you to make an intelligent decision, we're gonna hand this all to you, and we're gonna trust for you to vote and make a good decision about it. Why would we not have approved that? But instead, we were told, no, you don't get a vote, and this is what's going to happen. And thankfully, they have postponed it this year so that at least we have, thank you, Suzanne, for being a part of the test site. So, I'm affirming of the direction that the cabinet is now going. They're testing it out. We'll be able to get some feedback. And my hope and prayer is that at annual conference of 2023, the cabinet will give us enough information ahead of time so that we can review it, and we'll say, we'd love your feedback and for your participation in the democratic process. So that's where I believe we could really help. Erna, I think you had a question too, or a comment?
Yeah, just a thought that, do you think that if enough of the churches got, started on this path that you're talking about, and balancing our yin and our yang to get together, do you think that will impact the annual conference eventually? Do you think it can work up, or does it have to start from the top and down?
I think it can work up.
Okay.
It's just insanely hard. And unfortunately, I mean, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back so much, but that's what I think we were trying to do last summer, was to say to the cabinet, okay, you're not going to do this, so we're going to do this. We want health, we want improvement, we want things to get better. And is it possible? It is. The hard part is it's just so painful, because I'll tell you, when we put that legislation forward the last 2 summers, there were several clergy who said to me, Anthony, there's no way I can put my name on this. I have too much to risk. I cannot lose my job. I'll tell you another one. We had one person who, before they put their name on it, I said, now, because I said this to everyone, you need to know, I'm I'm stirring the pot here, and if you put your name on this, you need to make sure you have nothing to lose by putting your name on this legislation. He put his name on the legislation. I turned it in, and about a week later, this pastor called me and said, can you take my name off? And I said, no, it's been submitted, like it's public now. And he said, oh, all right. And we had this entire conversation because he realized he had something to lose, and he shouldn't have put his name on the legislation. Can it work bottom up? It can, it's just hard. So now I want to take that from the annual conference to the local church. All of you are lay folks. Can you help a pastor be healthier than behavior they may currently be exhibiting? That's really hard, and it is possible. So I'm not speaking pointed, and this is just general, please, because all your pastors are friends of mine. So. But pastors move, right? We come and go. So, your pastor is wonderful. You may get a new pastor, and that new pastor may not want to support a healthy immune system. But if that happens, then we have to work by non-shame-based behaviors. So I would say if a pastor is not behaving well, then we have to treat them with respect, right? The same respect we would want. We have to treat them with respect. We have to communicate with that pastor to be able to say, this is what I expect. Or when we see behaviors that are not working, to be able to say, this behavior we don't approve of. And I'm going to put that in writing so that you're aware of that this is behavior our whole community does not approve of. And so this is a warning. I think that's appropriate. And I'll tell you, have I been written up? I haven't been written up, but I have had my SPRC tell me, Pastor Anthony, you didn't deal with that well, and you're going to fix this, and here is how you are going to fix this. It was a hard conversation. I lived through it, and I'm better for it. Because my SPRC was honest and loving. Right, that's the key, is they tell all of us pastors, no lay people will listen to us if they don't know that we love them first. And the same goes for all of you, right? No pastor's going to listen to you if they don't know that you love them. So if you love them, you can be honest through that loving. And but I will also add this. I think in my career, I have written up 4 lay people. I have, because their behavior was really bad. Now, before I did that, I wrote it out and I went to my SPRC chairperson and I said, this is a big deal and I need you to be a part of this. Here's the behavior I witnessed. I felt this was unacceptable, and I'm writing this lay person up. And I'm thinking about one in particular. I can't say it went well, but that behavior was not exhibited again. And I made sure to check it with my SPRC chair. So, I think this can go both ways, that sometimes we as pastors can behave badly, and we need our laypersons to help nurture and love us and guide us through those mistakes. And likewise, we have to be able to do that for our community, for each other, because if we don't have an immune system, then that means any virus can attack us. And that's not a healthy body.
My last comment is, I think it's very interesting based on what you're talking about, that our theme underneath this bishop is to thrive. Are we thriving? It's just.
I'm prayerful that we can keep moving that direction. And my theory, my belief is that the reason that the church has been in decline for the last 40 or 50 years is not because we're not doing enough evangelism. I think we've been in decline because we haven't been healthy. But the healthier that we get, I think the more vital we can become and we can get stronger. Erna, I'm not sure if I fully kind of answered your previous question, but I think it's possible that any person in the organization can help the organization get a little bit healthier.
Mhm.
It's just most easy when it is established by the leadership, the church council and the pastor. That when our church council as our legislative group, the pastor as the executive or the staff as the executive, and our SPRC as our judicial branch, when those three branches can work together, then I think that creates the strongest movement for health. And it's up to everybody in the entire organization to keep it alive.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone want to disagree with me? If you have a point of disagreement, please speak up.
They're
I
all
love a
being
good
too
argument.
respectful. No. What I, are there any more comments or questions? Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, I think you're right on target with this. Is the reason I've been agreeing to it, because I've seen it both in local churches and with our district superintendents and with the annual conference. So right on.
Thank you. Well, it's just been wonderful to have all of you here tonight. I've seen a few of you at most of the talks, and we thank you for returning. I don't think I've seen Tony before, but I know Tony from the Lay Servant Ministries, so haven't seen him for a while. Anyway, we really appreciate your time, Pastor Anthony, and your transparency and your honest comments. Thank you so much.
Well, hopefully I didn't get myself into too much trouble, but
well, we'll bleep out all the bits that we think are bad. How's that?
let me add, if I may.
Sure. No, it's okay.
Not just trying to cover my rear end, but I will say that over the last, what's it been? It's been 12 months now. So 12 months, I don't agree with everything Bishop Grant does, but also, and also, he has been very supportive of this healing process. And I think that District Superintendent Melissa Reinders is also on the committee, and her leadership has been excellent. She is working with our cabinet as well. And I really do have good hopes for our future, for the Desert Southwest Conference and for our churches. If I didn't have hope, I wouldn't still be working here. So I do have hope, and I love our churches. So, we'll see. We'll only have Bishop Grant for another 2 months. And so that'll be another question. What bishop will be coming into our region? And will they allow us to continue this journey of healing? Because it can be a challenge if they won't.
Well, let us keep that in our prayers then. I think everybody needs to pray that it will continue and strengthen. All right,
Jeannie,
folks. Yes.
Jeannie, I sent a chat.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got it. I've covered the chat. Who was that?
Ruth. My camera isn't working. I wasn't sure if my mute button would work.
She says, I truly respect your honesty and the title Dare to Lead for this talk. I hope as a new bishop, ! You further clergy have copies of their reviews. It's helpful, as we even have a right to our medical records. Thank you very much. And that would be from Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
All, and I do, would you mind if I said a prayer for us before
Please
we
do.
leave?
Oh, that would be a blessing for sure. Thank you.
Almighty God, I thank you for all of our churches, for these communities that have provided for us a home. I thank you for the communities that surround us with love and support and encouragement. I thank you for all of the pastors who work so hard and tirelessly. And I thank you for the grace you show to us, for all of us as pastors, for us as lay leaders, for all of our church members, for you show us forgiveness and grace and kindness. And we pray that you would bring a healing to all of our hearts, because we know that that's where healing always begins. So we pray that you would heal our hearts and strengthen us with courage, that we may continue to love others with respect and dignity, and to work in our churches to help them take those next steps to where you are calling us. Continue to guide us and lead us as your church. And for all of this calling, for your blessings, for your graciousness, and for the miracles that await us, we give you thanks. In your name we pray. Amen.
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 What a blessing. Thank you so much. I want to say, I'm just going to let you know that the next presentation is November 14th. Of course, it's a Monday night, the second Monday in November. And our guest presenter is Reverend Lynn Bartlow. So I just want to thank Pastor Anthony again and all of you for being dedicated to this.